Greetings, everyone. This is Caroline Staten with Transition US, and thank you so much for joining our online event today. For those of you that are just coming in the room, I'm going to make a few announcements before we begin. And just wanted to mention that our principal aim in providing these teleseminars is to offer practical support to the leaders of transition initiatives, those who are considering starting a transition initiative, and community leaders all across the country and around the world that are working, putting their time and energy into resilience building efforts within their cities and towns and locales. So welcome, everyone. And we do want to offer these at no cost. In fact, we do, but ask that you consider making a donation. It costs us about $400 to put on one of these events, and appreciate your support so that we can continue to make these happen. And just want to thank all of you in advance, those of you who are able to contribute in this way. Thanks so very much. Now, without further ado, I'd like to describe the event today, the teleseminar today. It's called Circle Forward, Governance for Resilience. And we use governance every day. It's decision making. We use it every day in our lives. We use it in community groups, in our jobs. It's the systems that decisions are implemented. It's within our families. Some forms of governance can help our life or groups become resilient and move forward with elegant coordination, while others create obstacles and even lead to breakdown. And around the world, organizers, businesses, and networks are using a new operating system, and that's called Circle Forward. And that's what we'll be hearing about today. And Circle Forward are processes to help us be more resilient, creative, and productive, like healthy systems in a natural world. And I wanted to introduce our two wonderful guests today that have had years of experience working in this decision-making area. And they work with a lot of different types of organizations, schools, businesses, alliances, networks, intentional communities, and are very conversant in a lot of different systems. And this is a new system called Circle Forward, and we'll be hearing about that today. Our two guests are John Buck and Tracy Conkler. And John Buck is co-author of We the People, Consenting to a Deeper Democracy. And he's founder of Governance Alive, LLC, and the Sociocracy Consulting Group. And Tracy Conkler works with networks and organizations who are creating high-impact social change. She's principal and co-founder of Social Profit Strategies. So I know we're going to learn a lot from the two of you today. And just thank you so much for joining us, and turning it over to you, John and Tracy.
Thank you. In your slide package, please go to slide 3, which is the agenda. In the agenda today, we will do a poll to start introducing governance as a topic. We'll describe Circle Forward in general, and then we'll focus on one aspect. We hope this will give you enough information to know whether you want to learn more about Circle Forward for your transition group. And we'll give you some links if you do want to learn more. One footnote, you may have heard of this methodology under the names sociocracy or dynamic governance. We've decided to start using the term Circle Forward as everyday words that describe what we do.
Yeah, let's move on to the next slide. Really, we wanted to get some sense of who was in the audience and also kind of prime the pump for the conversation about governance, because all of those questions relate to your governance system. And sometimes, you know, the folks who were applying that they weren't really clear about decision making, for example, you know, a lot of times having a conversation about governance is not the most interesting conversation that people want to have. You know, you're getting together for some purpose that, you know, is related to your work and what you're trying to do in the world. And we're going to talk with you a little bit today about why it's important to be intentional about governance and the kind of choices you make regarding these questions that you just answered, about how you structure your work, about how you make your policies and decisions transparent to each other, about how you make decisions together, because these affect how we actually, the relationships that we have and the kind of culture that we create. And how we answer these questions will really determine whether our culture is in line with our values or whether we're creating a culture maybe that's not very pleasant to be in. And I've been in a lot of groups, for example, where the purpose wasn't really clear, and that created a lot of tension in the group. And what happens is, because governance, it's one of those things that can almost operate invisibly. It's an underlying structure. When our governance is not working well, it often shows up as what we see as are the symptoms of our governance system not working very well. So a lot of times what we see is people, there's a tension in the group. It's hard to make decisions. The group can get stuck in its process and feel like it's not moving forward. And sometimes that looks like it's, well, if this person just acted differently or that person, that would correct the situation. But really, governance is a key leverage point in systems change. So it's a key leverage point if you want to change just the system of your organization and how you all are operating and how well you're progressing on your goals. But I also think about it a lot in terms of our bigger systems, like our food systems or our government systems. Changing our governance at that level, at that societal level, is also a key leverage point for change. And the transition movement, I think, recognizes this, that as we're looking at how we produce energy and food and other systems, that we also need to ask ourselves, how are we making decisions together? And is it in line with our values, and is it getting the results that we want? The other thing that I want to mention about thinking about governance and making that more intentional is, well, just to ask, and Caroline, can we do, just ask everybody to raise their hands. How many people here in the audience are over 40? And I'm raising my hand. Are you raising your hand, John?
Oh, yes.
How do you raise your hand on this?
You press 1 on your keypad for a yes.
Okay, everybody press 1 if you're over 40. I guess we could have done a polling too. How many hands are raising there, Carolyn?
At this point, 61%.
Okay, so good. So we're in good company here. So all of you, like me, you probably remember when you needed to work on an issue or problem when you were younger, and you had questions, you wanted to learn more information about something. You went to the library and you might have looked through a card catalog and found a book about that information or talked to a reference librarian. What do you do now? When you have a question or you need information, you Google it. You have answers instantly. Or let me give you another example. You might remember a time in your life when you didn't, like 100% of the time, you left the house and you had no phone on you. 100% of the time when I was growing up, we did not have a phone on us. So what I want to say about governance is everything around us is changing. The rules of the game are changing everywhere. But most cases, people are still using governance systems that date back to the 19th or the 18th century. And so there's a real imperative for us to update our governance so that it's responsive to a world that is much more diverse and much more complex than it was when a lot of our governance systems and our decision-making systems were put into place. So that's kind of the why. John?
So let's go to slide 6, if you would. What this does is we summarize the guidance on governance that you can find on the Transition US website, as well as a book that's footnoted at the bottom there by Rob Hopkins called The Transition Companion and Transition US, or excuse me, The Transition Companion. And just very briefly, this guidance says to start with a steering group as you get your transition group going, set up working groups, and transition to a representative steering council. And it sounds like at least a third of the people have made it through step 3 there. Have a clear format for your meetings. Use open space for full membership meetings. Develop an energy dissent action plan. And set up a legal structure, and then make a bridge to local government. And Tracy and I think all those are really good things to do, and we have some things that we would recommend doing in addition. And so right now we're going to go and look at those slides. Like slide 7 starts the next section of our presentation here. It talks about there being 3 elements, and everybody who has their slide package available there can see that the 3 core elements are performance with a purpose, collaborative decision-making, and dynamic systems and leadership. So we're going to touch base on those 3 concepts that we suggest adding to the guidance that you now have about transition. And let's see, slide 8 here. And Tracy, I see you on slide 8, and my notes are confusing to me here, so I think I'll go continue on slide 8. Slide 8 says performance with a purpose, and that means that you should be operating out of something called a circle. Circle is a set of people that have a shared aim, and that circle becomes almost like your legislature, your rule-making body, that guides how you go forward with the work of this group of people that we're calling a circle. It could be that your whole, or in some sense, a circle is your whole organization, but as you grow, as you create working groups and so on, those working groups should be acting as circles. So you may have a group right now, and there are some things you can do that bring in the circle forward dynamics. There is a circle is a kind of ring of brain power that meets to determine roles and policies and selects leaders and keeps records. It has its own memory system, and it exists to realize a common aim or a common goal, a common product that you produce, or a common service. Tracy, why don't you take slide 9?
Yeah, and so that first slide, that probably sounds really familiar, and like we said, it's going to be really hard to move into the next principle of Circle Forward, which is about collaborative decision-making, if you don't really have a clear sense of your purpose as a circle. But when you go to that slide number 9, you'll see a picture. It looks like a Venn diagram of these overlapping green circles. And I want to talk about the two pictures that are on this page to help you think about collaborative decision-making. And the principle in Circle Forward that your governance decision-making would be governed by the principle of consent. And consent sounds like consensus, but it's actually really different. And so I want to use these 2 pictures to think about that. The first one, the green circles. So when we're in groups and they are very diverse, our values overlap generally, and we find our purpose in where our values overlap. But a lot of things that we have don't necessarily overlap. And so the principle of consent, what we're really looking for in the group is our solutions that we can all get on board with, that are within our range of tolerance. So it doesn't have to be within our preference. We don't need all those green circles to line up and be in unity and look like one unified green circle. We can actually have a lot of diversity, and the principle of consent is saying we're really steering toward where we overlap and where we can find common ground together, like an ecosystem. And so we can bring, those green circles really represent where all these different values in a system meet. And collaborative decision-making is a form of decision-making where we think about whole systems. So for example, we're looking for solutions where all of our values overlap. Like if we can find a solution where we can turn a waste stream into a resource that also provides economic opportunity, that also enhances our relationships with each other and builds community across diverse groups, that also creates an alternative to fossil fuel energy. For example, there is a business we have here in Asheville, and it's a biofuels business that picks up a waste stream, used vegetable oil, and turns it into fuel, into oil for gasoline and heating. So that's a solution that integrates all of our values. And as we move forward in systems, we need a decision-making framework that helps us to get to that place, to these kind of both-and solutions. So we're not pitting economics against environmental integrity anymore, for example. And we in the transition movement understand, I think, and others understand that we need those solutions that integrate a lot of values at the same time. And the process that we use is something called a tool called a range of tolerance. So we don't need to find the perfect solution, right? What we're looking for is when proposals are made, for whom is that proposal out of their range of tolerance, meaning an essential value is not being met. An essential value that the group has defined is not being met. And that's really all we need to be focused on as we're steering forward. So some people in the group are going to really prefer a decision. Some people are going to just be fine with it. But when somebody in the group, a part of our system, cannot tolerate that decision, and that shows up in their body, that shows up as a tension or an uneasy feeling, we actually really want to invite that perspective, because that's part of our system that's telling us that we're going to miss a key value. We're going to move forward, and we might have unintentionally bad consequences if we move forward with that decision. So this range of tolerance tool gives us a way to have inclusiveness and make sure that we don't steamroll over people's concerns, but at the same time, we don't have to come up with a perfect solution or any sense of unity or anything that everybody prefers. And this really distinguishes it from consensus. We're not going to spend a lot of time on collaborative decision, on the consent principle today, but it's important to kind of get a feeling for this principle before we move on. I think we wanted to stop here for a minute. John, did you want to say anything else about?
Just a quick comment. The speaker on this webinar last week or last time was talking about core teams and mentioned something that he called the tyranny of inclusion. And we find that by focusing on, can I tolerate this? Can I live with it? Do I have any paramount objection to it based on not being able to tolerate it? Asking that question makes a big difference with this tyranny of inclusion where you're trying to get everybody to agree. You're only interested in whether they can tolerate it. So just it's a fascinating concept that requires more discussion and some experience to really get it if you haven't encountered consent decision making. So let me go on to slide 10 here. No, let's stop and take questions at this point. A couple of questions.
Like one or two questions. Let's just see. We want to keep moving, but we want to make sure to see if there are any questions on anything.
You know, Tracy, why don't I go ahead and finish slide 10, and people can have asked questions then, and then we'll stop after slide 10.
Okay.
So they have time to write their questions out.
Okay.
So in slide 10, this is the third of the three principles we said should be added to the current concept of transition governance. And slide 10 is a structural one. It says that both leadership roles have consent in both circles. It's something called double linking. Double linking creates an unbroken circle where everybody has a voice, but it's more efficient because everybody does not have to go to every meeting. So, for example, if you have a steering council and a project group, then you have two types of people who should be in both the project group and in the steering council that is dealing with the big picture. One would be something you might call an outlink. This is the person who's responsible for guiding, leading that specific project group. And the uplink is somebody that the group selects through this collaborative decision making. There's a specific process for electing people with consent. And that person is a voice that brings up the concrete information on the ground, so and the, specific to the project, so that when the council is looking at the big picture, they've got both the viewpoint of the person who's doing the leading as well as somebody who is elected for their good judgment to participate fully in the council circle. And this, as we'll see in a little bit, can actually link many, many, many circles together in a way that that lets them specialize in what they're doing, but also creates one great big circle, in essence, for everybody. So that double linking is an important concept that you can use to grow what you're doing. So that's what I had to say about that, Tracy. Do we have questions coming in, Caroline?
Press 1 on your keypad if you have a question or a comment. And John, not as yet. No one has pressed 1 on the keypad. Oh, someone has. I take that back. Hold on a minute here. Let's see. Lynn, go ahead. What is your question or comment?
Yes, I've been working, with Senators Bernie Sanders a bit and some other progressives and this populist movement, and it pertains really to the Cities of Light, which looks like your prototypes here for the transition movement towns. So, and where everyone, a community service jobs bill at $2,600 a month guaranteed income with single payer attached to all these new jobs that are needed, that are green, and there's Body, Mind, Spirit healing circles open 24 hours a day in every community, and the integration so that we can, get in all the, and we have green teams with edible landscaping crews that include, all the herbs, including marijuana, plus.
Sounds neat.
On and on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can you go to your question?
Yeah, the question is how to get this into the legislation. They said the Secretary of State and each state could do it, and I thought maybe you guys could help handle that, where you can get the manuals to get the legislation so that we can actually bring in the real the legislation for these community service jobs bill. All races, religions are included, and everyone's included to to actually.
Right.
That's
good. Thanks, Lynn. Hey, Lynn. This is a great Hi, Lynn. Thanks for talking about that, because it is a real question about how do we get this information out to folks about some different ways that we could be making decisions and working together that are more inclusive. And one thing that we have on this handout, you'll see a link to our website, circleforward.us. And you can go there. We are going to be introducing a series of video packages, they're learning packages, so that these principles basically can be much more accessible. So people can come to our website. There will be a free introductory video that will allow you to share all this information that we're giving you today in this webinar. So in addition to this webinar, we have an introductory video package that can be circulated very broadly, so you can start to have the conversation about changing governance. And then we're also going to have video packages for learning this system of governance to just make it much more widely accessible and acceptable to do things differently. But it's going to be much more accessible. So I hope that for you all who have connections and this starts to sound really good to you, if you have connections with groups who might be interested in using it, it's going to be really easy to start to share this information. Okay?
And Tracy, in the last part of our presentation today, we're going to give you just a little peek at what we think we should be moving toward a system of governance. This whole system of depending upon a legislature is part of what's outmoded, and there are ways to incorporate that and add to it. So should we go on, or are there more questions, Caroline?
We do have another question from Robert. So Robert, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hear me. Okay.
Hello?
There are two ways to order pizza. one of them is everybody orders their first preference and argues for it. The other one is everyone votes for what they won't take, and that is a lot wider decision area that's acceptable. That makes sense?
So, if you would want to respond to that, Tracy or John?
I had trouble understanding what the person asked, and I'm wondering I don't know how to get it clarified. So maybe we could try taking that later in the call. I just couldn't understand what the question was.
Do you want to restate the question? Just clarify the question you have.
It was something about ordering pizza, and I didn't understand that.
Oh, right. I'm trying to just talk about deciding what pizza you'll have and comparing that process to the public debate and voting. And
well, I think I can answer. Go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I think let me. Yeah.
But why don't we answer that first question about pizza and then go on?
Okay, I have a thought about that as well, John.
Go ahead, Tracy. Go ahead.
Well, it just goes back to an example that we use thinking about consent, because a lot of people have a sense of consent, and it actually relates to ordering food together. So if a group of friends and I are going out to dinner together, for example, or ordering a pizza, we're going to use a process very similar to this range of tolerance to order that pizza. So I might suggest, hey, let's order a pepperoni pizza. I'll make a proposal. Somebody will say, I don't eat pepperoni, I'm a vegetarian. That, in essence, they're saying that's out of my range of tolerance. Okay, somebody else will make a suggestion. Well, how about we get sausage and onions, or green pepper and onions? And somebody else will say, well, onions upset my digestion, I can't do that. And this group will keep going along until they settle on a pizza that works for everybody. And so that's really a very similar, it's kind of an experience everybody's had of the consent process. It doesn't have to be the perfect pizza. It doesn't have to be the pizza that you absolutely love and your first choice. It just needs to be a pizza that you can enjoy, because probably the aim of ordering a pizza is so that everybody has a group social experience together. And so you don't want to get caught up on arguing the perfect pizza. So I'm going to offer that to you as a response to that question, and I think that it might be good for us to move on, John.
Okay. Slide 11 is the same thing that we saw earlier, except that we're going to focus in now on just one aspect, a transition to a representative steering council, in order to illustrate how the three principles of Circle Forward would be added to the basic governance guidance that you currently have. So
okay.
Tracy, why don't you take it away with slide 12?
Yeah, well, slide 12 is looking at this double linking principle in a sample steering council where you would have working groups. And about a third of you said you were working in organizations that had this kind of structure. And the transition, what we saw in the transition handbook was the recommendation that each working group send a representative to a steering council. As the group is maturing and it's developing working groups, each working group would have a liaison, would have a representative or a delegate that would go to the steering council. And so the difference here is we're saying you'd actually have two people that would link circles rather than one liaison. And why do you need two liaisons or delegates or leaders to link circles rather than just one? Can't you just have one person that carries the message back and forth? And the reality is that it doesn't work really well to just have one liaison. It's very hard to communicate both perspectives at the same time. And so we have two leadership roles. One leadership role, as John said, would carry the message of the steering council. So the steering council would be responsible for the overall direction in your transition group or maybe in a different community-based initiative. So the steering council, that kind of role, that group holds the big picture vision. They hold the big plan, the overall strategy for the organization. And the outlink role carries that overall strategy to each specific working group. This is a really stylized picture, so all the people on the steering committee, group look a little the same, but we would assume they're different people, and the outlink is carrying the big picture out to the working group. And that's their focus when they sit in the working group meeting, is to make sure that that working group has an understanding of the whole. And as they're making decisions, that role helps the working group to understand the part that it's playing in the overall vision and the overall strategy. This is really important. I work with some groups locally here. They don't have that outlink role, and sometimes the working groups just kind of get off on their own, and they're going in their own direction, and they're making their own plans, which is great, but they don't always tie back in then to an overall strategy. All these different parts don't really seem to be working together and leveraging each other's work together. So we go for a flat organization, but we lose the ability to leverage together something bigger than what we can do in our individual working groups. So that outlink role is there making decisions, helping to make decisions, having consent around, is this working group really functioning as part of the whole? Here's what's cool about double linking is there's somebody that working group picks as their voice, as an uplink, to make sure that when the steering council is making the big picture and the big strategy, that the voice of the working group is represented. So go in the other direction, that leadership role, that uplink is sitting on the steering council, and as the steering council is getting a sense of the big strategy, that uplink is really communicating the interests, the perspectives of that working group. What's important to them? What's the priority in that working group? So if that working group is an education working group, for example, what are the priorities? What are the opportunities that they're seeing? And they're bringing that into the overall big picture strategy. So the big picture strategy is being made with the voice of the working group at the table. The working group strategy is being made with the big picture voice at the table. If you want to go on to slide number 13, I took all the little faces out of the picture, and you just see the circles. If you trace those arrows, you'll see that what you have here is still one unbroken circle. You can trace these arrows all the way around this picture, around all these circles, and you see that there's a continuous loop of information and influence. So what we're doing is we're creating something that's more like natural systems. Like if you think about your circulatory system, you don't just have one set of tubes that carry the blood out and back to your heart at the same time. That's the comparable thing to having one liaison between circles. Actually, in your circulatory system and in lots of systems in nature, you have this continuous looping. So you have your arteries that carry the blood out, you have your veins that bring the blood back. And so this outlink and this uplink structure is actually structuring into your organization two-way communication flow and two-way influence flow. So you want to stop now and take any more questions, John, at this point? Because we're going to take this to the next level. I think we should go on and take questions afterwards. I think let's go on. Okay. So I think we're going to move to slide 14 now.
Hey, we promised to blow their mind at this point. Remember, we said that the governance system we inherited from the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, 20th century, are outmoded. Here's a formula that transition movement can actually help construct. And if you look at slide 14, the concept here is that the transition movement ought to be then becoming a part of a larger alliance of councils, which maintains the same structure of an outlink and an uplink. And if you go to slide 15, you can see this actually happening with the Appalachian Food Shed Project. And Tracy, why don't you give a quick summary of the Appalachian Food Shed Project, which is on the ground actually happening with this new governance system.
Okay, sure. Let me just go back to slide 14 for a second, because I want to just make sure folks are getting this. Is that this double linking between circles and between these different initiatives allows, it's kind of a fractal structure. So you can keep pulling, if you had, let's say this slide on 14, this picture, let's just say those were all transition movements and they all had steering councils and they came together in this alliance of councils, right? You can see that they can click together and have that continuous loop still happening of information. And that alliance of councils could link to the next level up as well. And so there's like a kind of fractal structure that can get pretty complex but still maintain at a baseline the principle of consent across these circles. So when you get into slide 15, this is an experiment, really, I think still, that we're doing in Central Appalachia. So I'm going to walk you through what's happening here, and you can see it's a project, it's a multi-state project across the Appalachian regions of North Carolina, West Virginia, and Virginia. And the reason that the two yellow circles in North Carolina and Virginia, that those are dotted lines, is because both of those states, the Appalachian region, is only part of the state. So this project, the Appalachian Food Shed Project, only covers part of North Carolina and Virginia, the Appalachian region. The green circles, so let's start this. So this Appalachian Food Shed Project, it's a multi-state initiative. It's a collaboration between 3 universities, NC State, West Virginia University, and Virginia Tech. And they have a management team, and that's what that orange circle represents. And they had all those representatives from each of those universities who were staff for this grant project to create a linked network and a more resilient food system throughout the food shed in Central Appalachia. And it's kind of like a watershed. It's kind of drawing biological boundaries around the food shed, and so as they were going out into the communities and trying to organize and help support work that was happening on the ground in communities, they had a very traditional structure, so that project management staff would go out into the communities and they'd hold meetings and they'd organize, and then they'd come back, the project staff would come back to the management team and powwow and try to make decisions. And when I started working with this group, one of the issues that they had was that they would sit around in the management team and they would get stuck sometimes because they would say, well, what do you think community partners would think about this decision? How do you think they would respond to this decision? And they didn't have any community partners sitting on the management team because it was a collaboration among the universities and they staffed the project. And so when I started working with them, we gradually moved to a little bit different of an organizational structure. And what they did was invite representatives, uplinks, from each of the states to participate and have full decision making in the management of this project. It was really interesting because at first folks thought, oh, community partners don't have time to sit in more meetings. I'm not sure if this structure is going to work where we invite participation from the ground and from these community partners. And the truth was, in each state said, we want to send 2 representatives. It wasn't even just 1 rep, but we want to send 2 reps. So that's what you see here. The orange arrows going out from the project are those project staff. The yellow and green, the green arrows, well, it's yellow in West Virginia, and the green arrows coming up from West Virginia, from Western North Carolina and Virginia are those representatives, the community partner representatives. And what happened was the decision making got a lot more efficient and streamlined because they had all the voices that they needed at the table to make good decisions. And this has even included some pretty heavy decisions around how funding was going to be allocated. how the whole process by which this project would grant community projects. These community partners had a voice in how those funds were used and distributed, and by the principle of consent. And I just want to say we've had calls that have been like 15 to 18 people on a phone call, on a phone conference, and we've been able to use the principle of consent. Does it take a little bit longer? It sure does. But the nice thing is that we haven't had to go back and clean up messes later. We've been able to keep moving forward in the project and get a lot of buy-in as we go. So what's interesting, though, is that, again, this fractal structure. So at the regional level, at the Western North Carolina Community Food Security Council, that was a council that covers the region. They send their representatives up to the management team. They were able to receive representative uplinks from some other food council, county-level food councils. So these county-level food councils were invited by the Western North Carolina Food Security Council to send uplinks and send representatives. So this allowed the regional group, which covered about 23 counties, to have local county-based voices in their decision making. And this is even going down to the neighborhood level, because the Food Policy Council in my home county, Buncombe County, is inviting right now representation from low wealth communities in the county, in the town of Asheville, public housing residents, to be an uplink voice into the county level Food Policy Council. So what you see here is that this structure is starting to create a continuous loop of information and influence that goes all the way from a neighborhood level that involves people in low wealth communities who experience food insecurity to connect all the way up to a multi-state project and have influence in the direction of this whole movement at a multi-state level. Now, I do want to say there's a caveat here, because we are using this diagram and using this process of kind of raising awareness to actually engage people in using these tools even more intentionally. So some of these links are happening, but people don't even realize yet that they're performing a double linking role. And that's just simply because these circles represent just dozens, hundreds of people. And like I said, we're coming out with some video packages because we really need this material to be much more accessible and for people to be much more intentionally aware of how they can start to move together on issues related to food security at pretty large scales, while involving and including the voices of people at every level in this system. So this is this diagram here is a little bit more of a vision still than it is a reality, although it's coming into focus and into being. And some of these double links are very intentional, and people really understand the double linking that they're providing. Another way to look at what's going on here is to look at the slide number 16. So if you were looking at all these circles from another angle, what you see is that that Western North Carolina region is starting to connect all the way down to the local neighborhood level, all the way back up to the multi-state level. That's why we have the little circles and circles, because there's actually connecting that's happening there. And if you think about our goals in terms of integrating diversity, you see that Western North Carolina circle is really starting to integrate a high level of diversity of people at lots of different levels in the system. So I keep going, John. Do you want to add anything?
Let me just wrap up because we're running short on time. Let me direct everybody to slide 17. This is another application that Residence Council that was the purple circle actually is linking in Food Policy Council, law enforcement. That Food Policy Council is the one we saw in the big diagram on page 15. But they're bringing in law enforcement.
I wanted to make sure people realize it's almost like we're starting now in that bigger picture, that multi-state picture, really coming back and starting. Let's start with the purple circle. Let's start with the very local level and show you that you can this local level can be connecting into this whole food policy or food security network as just one of its branches. At the local level, it can be branching up, but it can also be branching into other systems at the same time.
Right.
And this is how there can be much more empowerment at the local level. I'm sorry, Don, I just wanted to make sure folks.
That's fine. And so here we have Transition Asheville connecting to the Residents Council, and the local transition groups should be connecting into the different aspects of their communities so that they're starting to encourage the building of these networks. These networks, as you can see, include things like law enforcement, include traditional government, but they add to it. They add a whole other layer of coordination that we think is the way to upgrade the governance system and eventually try to deal with such things as what do we do about the climate. Current governance system is totally incapable of handling the climate change, and so a networked approach like this is a very practical way of starting to build an alternative, new, modernized system of governance, and the transition movements can be really key in trying to build these network governments. Why don't I wrap up, Tracy, and we'll get questions.
Okay.
Okay, so if you look at slide 18, to summarize what we've been talking about, we talked first about good governance, and we had that poll, and we talked about, Caroline had even talked about how we do governance every day. We looked at all the different sorts of guidance that is currently available for transition movements, and we focused in just on where you can go with a steering council, number 3, but there's actually something to be said for each of these things, each of the items, in that adding the 3 circle forward principles. And so the dot points down below talk about using consent decision making from the start in step 1. When you get to step 3, add your double linking. And then there's much more to learn from the video. So those are examples of how these circle forward principles can help really unleash the potential that's in a transition group. If you want more information, please visit us at the circleforward.us website, and I think our contact information is in this package somewhere, isn't it, Tracy? In addition to that,
yes,
or is that the main?
Yeah,
that's the main link. But there's also, if you look on slide 2, there's more information about how to get hold of us. And Tracy, do you have anything to add to wrap it up before we go for questions?
Yeah, we focused on this structure so that we can actually just build like we're doing with alternative energy, alternative food structures. We're kind of building the world that we want to live in alongside the current world. We don't have to tear anything down. We just kind of create what it is that we want to see. And so we can build these linked networks right alongside what's happening right now and slowly start to transition, plug into a different way of organizing how we set policy and how we work together. But governance is very comprehensive. So we're showing you one little slice of this new way of organizing. There's a lot of guidance and new ways of looking at how we work together that's encompassed in the Circle Forward system. So I just wanted to, I guess, say that is a lot of these, a lot of this guidance. There's a lot of different kinds of pieces of guidance when you're trying to institute a new governance system. It's not really 10 easy steps. There's actually quite a lot of new learning that we need to do to be able to operate in the ways that would be more consistent with our values. And I think that's, I think we're good.
Yeah, let's ask for questions, Caroline, if you would.
Yes. So questions or comments, press 1 on your keypad, and we'll call on you. You can.
While we're waiting, Caroline, did you have any questions or any reflections?
You know, I've been using this process and learning more about it, but it is one that we are also using on an international level between the national hubs. So it's great when the whole community is endorsing it, and you know, there's a lot of good checks and balances that way. So I appreciate it very much.
Mm-hmm. That is really important. That's something that's will help us in speeding up our ability to connect across sectors, and is our ability to speak a common language about governance. Mm-hmm. So I think that's absolutely right.
Looks like we have a question.
We do. We have a question from Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is awesome. This is my first teleconference. Anyway, this just a comment. It reminds me. I read a book about the Iroquois Confederacy and their sort of democracy, you could call it, I guess. And this is very similar to what they had. But I also had another thing. If you're dealing like in this one diagram with the different circles, one of them being law enforcement. Now, law enforcement, you don't think of it as being like a consensus circle. That they're more kind of authoritarian, I would guess. And so if you're dealing with a circle that, you know, maybe isn't a consensus based, how does that affect the structure?
I can answer that, Tracy, if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's if you have just somebody from the local police, you have that person there with their expertise about law enforcement, and that's what you have. And they can work with you to make a consent decision in your resident council or whatever the council is. As you talk to them, they actually begin to see what's happening with this circle forward process, and they'll say, we would like training in that. This is actually happening in Asheville with the Housing Authority, for example. They've said, we want the training too. So as that develops, then they say, all right, we'll take a representative back up from your council into the, you know, one of our circles in law enforcement or the Housing Authority. We need to hear your voice. And so the education starts spreading the idea of, oh, we can actually network with each other, and we don't have to be stuck in these autocratic top-down systems. The autocratic top-down system can benefit by having a circle structure overlaid on it. And that's how we see it beginning to grow.
Can I add to that, John? Because even if the law enforcement doesn't resonate at first with Circle Forward, there's something else that can happen here, which is, just as John said, the law enforcement officer is there in the neighborhood decision-making process. But then if there's something that the neighborhood wants to do that the law enforcement officer thinks is a really good idea but doesn't have the authority to implement, like maybe they have a policy that prevents that law enforcement officer from doing what would be good for the neighborhood, instead of just the officer going back to the police department, the officer goes with members of the circle who, all of them together, can go back and talk to whoever has authority to change the policy. And so the officer doesn't try to represent other people's point of view. He actually brings the circle to circle, chooses those folks to go with the law enforcement officer and to talk to whoever's in charge about, hey, can we do something about this policy? Because we've got a really good idea we want to implement here, and your policy is, you know, we'd like to change it or modify it.
Right. And that's the first step in starting to spread the circle forward concepts of, you know, we need to be listening to each other.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question. Go ahead, Michelle. Michelle? You might be on mute.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm Michelle Smith. I'm one of the co-founders with Tracy and John of circleforward.us. And that was such a great question that Mike asked, but I really was hoping that John or Tracy, John particularly, would speak to Mike's observation of the similarity with the Iroquois Nation. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Iroquois Nation actually was very influential in the Articles of Confederation that we adopted before we had the current U.S. Constitution. And there are some definitely lots of resonance in the circle process with indigenous cultures. I have had the privilege of working with some Maoris in New Zealand, and they understand circle process very well. What they don't have is the concept of consent and the concept of double linking were not as clearly worked out in those two indigenous cultures as is worked out with Circle Forward. It seems to be the kind of the improvement direction, and it's very much coming from just the natural indigenous way of doing things.
Yeah. When the grassroots organizes, it organizes the circle a lot of the time, just in general. I want to invite, is there anybody out there right now that would have the courage to say, this sounds crazy, or I didn't get this. I am missing something here. I would just invite those alternate perspectives of this something's not making sense here. And just invite if anybody wants to share that, can step up and ask those questions.
Before we do that, Tracy, there's Michael had his hand up, so he put his hand up before your call for others. So Michael, let's get to you, and then Tracy put out that call again. Michael?
So my question is mostly about my own particular group. I feel like I would love to have a Circle Forward group, but I don't think I have enough people working together. We don't really have the numbers to, kind of support like outlinks and inlinks and uplinks. I'm sorry. And so, I know I really like that consent model, that box of consent that we talked about at the beginning, and I know we could work with that, but I'm not sure how to get from there to a full bore group that would warrant uplinks and downlinks. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yes. You want to answer that, John?
No, go ahead, Tracy. I
would say, we probably are doing fine without the uplinks and outlinks. First of all, if you all fit in one circle together and you can use the principle of consent, that means that your circle at some point in the future could link to another initiative in your area. So by practicing the principle of consent, you're set up to be able to link perhaps to another whole different initiative in your community at some point. We don't want to, these are tools. It's like Circle Forward doesn't govern you, you govern, and these are some tools that people find to be really helpful. So if your organization is not so complicated or complex that you need to formalize that uplink voice so that you make sure you're hearing it, then don't worry about it. Yeah. I would say don't worry about it. That was a really good.
Mm-hmm. That was a really good point about the other organizations. I think I could definitely use that. So, we do have representatives that meet with us, but I don't think it's going to be both ways, like we may not have two people that can, communicate with another group. We might have one. But we're getting there.
If I could just step in,
Tracy, John?
Get going. Yeah, get going with it. Go to the circleforward.us site, sign up. We're going to have some videos ready very shortly that'll help with the training. And just get going with it. Just using the consent process, focusing on your aims, I think you'll find will help the group grow, because it's you end up your meetings really energized when you're using consent, and so you've got the basis to get going with it and try experimenting.
Yeah.
Good. It looks like we might have one more question.
Okay. The other thing I just wanted to say just about this is sometimes I also tell people, think about it almost like an energy flow. So you need that outward energy. You need to have, if you have multiple circles, you need to have something that you need to get the big picture out. And if you have, you need to make sure that you're getting perspective in. And so, so sometimes there's a lot of different ways that you can structure it to kind of get that basic two-way flow of information and communication. And so, and it can be less formal and more formal. There's another question?
Yes, there is. Janice Lynn, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think you're kind of answering my questions, but my difficulty here where I work is that everybody's in a compartment and there isn't a lot of interaction. And so what you're saying is that we need to form a core group and then send representatives to these different groups. But I don't really get how, if they have different viewpoints and goals, how we can bring them together in any clear way, because people are so used to working independently. They have turf issues. They have different structures. It just kind of, I can't get my mind around how you overcome that.
I'll go first, Tracy. My thought is that if you get everybody together, or get some of the groups together, people from some of the groups, then you can ask, what is it that we have in common? What's our common aim? That's always the basis of a circle. What are we producing together? What's our values that are together? And if you get that clear, then that becomes what's in common with that core group that holds everybody else connected. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect sense, and that's perfect for where I'm headed, because I have been looking at this model for a while, and actually I'm developing skills in this arena. So yeah, I think this is really great. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
It's 3:15 right now. Do we need to close, Carolyn?
Yes, we have no other questions, and I was just thinking time to ask both of you. Tracy, let's start with you for some closing comments, and then we'll hear from John and wrap up for today.
Sure. I am just really excited to be here. I think that transition is the way that we are going to create the world that we want to live in. And I'm excited that I think that building the world that we want to see is becoming more of the narrative. More people are looking for alternatives now, and I think this is how we work together is a really important part of that. But I've just been very aligned with the transition goals for a long time, and I look forward to a real deep partnership with transition and how we can move some of our common goals forward together. That's all.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Tracy. John?
I'm really appreciating the thoughtfulness of the questions that we've had and the number of people who are expressed interest by joining. My summary is that the transition movement has grown up, in my mind, because of a failure of our governance system. The climate, the economy is just not functioning right. And so because it's grown up, because the government system is not working, one of the key things that transition movements have to offer is a new way of governing. And you don't have to have a revolution. You don't have to push anybody around. You just add these concepts on top of what's already happening, and you're starting to build a correction to why you came into existence to begin with. So just hope to hear lots more from you. I think the work that Transition is doing is really, really critical to us having a decent civilization in the years to come as we start to encounter more and more, particularly climate troubles. So thank you.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you, John, and thank you, Tracy, and all the participants today and those listening to it at a later time. Just really appreciate getting our systems functioning well. So these are important keys you've given us, and look forward to implementing them further. So best of luck in your work, John and Tracy, and we look forward to doing this again sometime. So
thank you. Just a last reminder. Go to circleforward.us and give us your Connect information, and we'll keep you apprised as to more information. And as we develop more things, we'll send it to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And signing off for today, everyone. Join us again. Bye-bye.